Would you like to know how to make your own IV drip of hope? Now, IV stands for intravenous, and we're not talking about putting your arm on an intravenous drip, but rather an internal creation and a slow drip and release of a chemical that you probably never heard of that makes us feel hopeful. Hi, my name is Jesse. Welcome to the channel Open Source Owners, where we talk about what would it be like if humans had an owner's manual. Well, this bit would certainly be in the owner's manual, and that's why I made a video about it. The importance of movement is what we're talking about. Notice I did not say exercise, I said movement, and we will see why the importance of movement is so critical. So any type of tensing and releasing of your muscles creates what are called hope molecules, which are really technically scientifically called myokines. Now that's a chemical most people have never heard of, myokines, but it is related to, as near as we can tell, the feeling of hope, hopefulness. So in this way, the muscles are sort of acting like an endocrine organ, and endocrine of course just means like a hormone system. So we probably never thought about our muscles and just tensing and releasing musculature as like a hormone effect, but it totally does. It actually improves our mood and gives us the feelings of hope and social connection, as we shall see. So myokines cross the blood-brain barrier and act as an antidepressant, increase motivation, so think dopamine there, and protect the brain from stress, which is hugely critical in this ever stressful world that we live in, that we have protective mechanisms against the sort of onslaught of stress. And in one study, exercise protected rodents from PTSD and trauma responses like depression after severe trauma. So I would hate to know what they did to those poor rodents, but what we can glean from that is if we experience something that might be, potentially be traumatic, then exercise, if we have a regular exercise practice or even doing exercise shortly after the traumatic event, can protect us from the responses that come after, like PTSD, like things like depression or severe traumatization. So movement is an intravenous dose of hope, according to Kelly McGonigal. And her book is in the link below if you want to get it. It's called The Joy of Movement. It's fantastic, and that's where most of this information is coming from. She compiles the latest data about movement and the benefits of movement in the chemical system and the social system of being a human. And I love the phrase, an intravenous dose of hope, because who wouldn't sign up for that if you could get that, right? But in a non-negative side effect, non-chemical addictive manner, we can do that through basic movement practices. And we'll talk more about what those might be. Exercise increases neurotransmitters like serotonin, dopamine, endorphins, lactic acid, and more. And lactic acid is known to have antidepressant effects on the body, amongst other things. Now, I said exercise there, but that could apply to all forms of movement, so it doesn't have to be running, etc. So the quote runner's high that people experience after running, and sometimes get addicted to, right, is chemically made up of a mix of endorphins and the endocannabinoid system. So endorphins just means endogenous, which just means inside of our own body, morphine-like substance. So it's an endogenous pain relief and mood amplifier. And then the endocannabinoid system, big word, but endo just means within. So it's an internal to humans cannabinoid system, which means we have receptors across our whole body, as far as I know, that are uniquely designed and seeking cannabinoids, locking key mechanisms, sort of, right? And so the endocannabinoid system, which is really an interesting system, and cannabinoid, by the way, relates to marijuana, so you're probably thinking about that. Cannabis, cannabinoid, marijuana, same sort of thing, right? Except that we have, curiously, humans have an endocannabinoid system. Now, I would like to know if other mammals have an endocannabinoid system as well, or if it's just humans, or if it's just humans and apes. I don't really know that. So if you know, put a comment below and let me know that, because that would be really interesting for me. I've not come across that information. But the endocannabinoid system, most people don't realize, if you know you have it, most people don't realize it's a neurotransmitter system. So, and it is used in the reduction of anxiety and making us more bold, courageous, and social. So pause there. If you or somebody you know has social anxiety or experiences that feeling of, when I am around other people, I get really anxious, and the opposite of bold and courageous, then keep this in mind, that movement and exercise practices will actually embolden us and make that social anxiety get lesser and lesser over time. It's like we're releasing the social anxiety through the act of movement. You could also say that smoking marijuana would do the same thing, but the problem with smoking marijuana is sometimes it can make people more insular, more wanting to social isolate. So you could experiment, of course. This is your own life and your own body. But what I'm getting at here is the connection between the endocannabinoid system and movement. That's a really critical connection that most people don't know. And we can really leverage if we know about it. And we can recognize, hey, this is why I'm moving. It's doing all these things, right? Now, oxytocin may also be released after running. So I guess the literature on that is somewhat like there's been some evidence for and some evidence not. But oxytocin, of course, is involved in bonding, so human connection. The way most people think about oxytocin is when a newborn baby and a mother are breastfeeding or holding each other really closely, there's a flow of oxytocin between both the mom and the baby. Oxytocin gets released when we pet our loved ones, like dogs and cats as well. Cuddling and holding hands and physical affection releases oxytocin. Now, oxytocin is a social bond hormone or chemical, but it's also pain relief. It's from whence Oxycontin comes from. It's sort of chemically similar to Oxycontin. Well, oxytocin was there first, of course, because it's natural. So oxytocin is involved in that bonding and pain relief, but not just that. It also helps us remember negative events in a less negative manner, and that's huge. So it colors memories for the better. One of the things that's so fascinating about this is that memories are not just memories that are like accurate representations of the real world. They're fragmentary representations of projections and predictions and what things are most like, because that's how the brain and the emotional system works. What are things most like? And then we sort of like fill in the details as a human system. If you or somebody you know suffers with social isolation, it's almost guaranteed that they will remember events in their most negative form. And it can be a downward spiral, as I'm sure you can understand, and hopefully you're not experiencing that. And if you are, my heart really goes out to you, because it's a horrible place to be in. Social isolation, so you don't get a lot of feedback. You don't get a lot of these chemical exchanges with other people, and therefore you're remembering events as negative as you can. So it gets worse and worse and worse over time. Whereas if you had been in amongst a group of people for all these years or for all these months, that same event would not have nearly as much negative sway. In fact, we would remember it more positively. So that's a very fascinating aspect of being a human, and it speaks deeply to how humans need to be connected to social milieus, or to a tribe, if you will, because that helps both our memory and our mood and prevent social isolation. And I mean, there's just on and on. We are social creatures by nature. Isolation is one of the worst things that can happen to a human, as you know, if you've been isolated. So again, my heart goes out to you if that's you. One of the best ways out of social isolation would be movement, because that, as we shall see, also connects to being pro-social. So movement is pro-social in human groups, which means the more we move or the more we engage in exercise on a regular basis, the more kind we'll see other people, the more kind we'll want to be, the more connected to others we will want to be. So there are genetic susceptibilities, which are called SNPs, SNMP, and that stands for single nucleotide polymorphism. You don't need to know that. But in the world of understanding genes, SNPs are individual, like you have a specific set of SNPs and I do, and they sort of like they make it more likely that we're going to have things like depression, anxiety, and cancer. So the SNPs are sort of something that we can look out for as a potential early warning sign in the genetics of any individual. And these SNPs can improve when we move regularly. And this whole thing, what we're talking about here, is called epigenetic phenomena. Now, epi means upon, and genetic means the gene. So upon the genes, we can affect change. We can help our genes express health or help our genes express unhealth, depression, anxiety, and cancer, depending on what we do. And this is how lifestyle affects genes. So eating is epigenetic. Movement is epigenetic. Engaging with other people is epigenetic. It changes the expression of our genes, and it makes us less likely to have things like depression, anxiety, and cancer. And so movement will affect not just those three things, but many other things, from heart disease to diabetes to Alzheimer's, and the list just goes on and on and on. So it's overwhelmingly beneficial to move, not just for these three specific things, but if it was just these three specific things alone, that would be enough, because people want to avoid those things. It's not fun to have clinical depression, clinical anxiety, or to get cancer, as everybody knows, right? So we can change our genes. So don't feel like you're a slave to your genes. You can change the expression of the genes through epigenetics. movement also changes your self-identity. So it's not just about image, like I do yoga and I'm a yoga person, or I'm a runner or something. That's like image, but it's also about internal self-modeling, like that you're tougher, you're more resilient, you have more grit, you can get through hardships. You might get knocked down, but you know you can get back up again. So that's about the deeper modeling of how we sort of see ourselves in the world. It's a deeper mindset change that becomes affected when we move regularly. So here are some examples of movement practices that you can do that are not traditional exercise, which of course we could add all the traditional exercise aspects to this list too. So we have axe throwing, kind of a cool one, powerlifting, martial arts, which is a whole class of different types of movement practices. And that, if you don't have a movement practice, but you're attracted to martial arts, I would say try several, you know, do a month here, a month there, and really get a feel for what feels the best for your body. Endurance practices, rowing, yoga, hiking, biking, swimming. Dance is another broad category. It's one of the most important forms of movement. Because most people can find a form of dance that really resonates with their body. It makes them feel right. It makes them feel connected in a way that, you know, you wouldn't otherwise be. Rollerblading, parkour, sports, juggling, ultramarathons, bow hunting. The list goes on. Walking is probably the easiest way in and probably one of the best ways of doing a movement practice. But the point of Kelly's book, The Joy of Movement, is to find a practice that's movement-based that actually makes you come alive. Not just like, I'm doing it because it's a good thing for my body, science. But like, yay, I come alive when I rollerblade, or I come alive when I do parkour. It like fulfills something else. And then the movement and the exercise is just a byproduct of it. So that's kind of where we'd like to get to ideally. And it might take some trial and error. So just try some things, give it some period of time before you give up on it. And then eventually you'll land on the one or the several movement practices that you really like and you probably will never get sick of. Okay, even very simple movements like stretching, tensing, releasing muscles, and walking for 5 minutes or less actually matters. Myokines are still released in that short window of time. Now, the 5 minutes or less is a strategy based on habit formation that I want to share with you and remind you of when you're starting from zero. So if you're like, I don't move at all, but okay, you've sold me, I want to start moving. How should I start? Pick one or two things that seem like they might fit for you. So you're like, okay, I'm going to start doing parkour. To establish it as a habit, you want to start with 5 minutes of parkour or less every single day. And you want to get 21 days to 30 days to 45 days in a row. Now you might miss a day here and there. That's fine. But you want to get small little victories, small little like did it. And that will actually begin to engender what's called habit formation, which is really neural pathways being formed in the brain. So you want to create those neural pathways so it gets easier to do. So your self-identity begins to shift. Okay, that's just what I do every morning. That's just what I do after lunch every day, etc. And then after it's a habit, so let's say after 30 days, 45 days, 60 days, and you're like, hey, I've been doing this. I've done it for most of those days in there. At that point, then you might say, okay, cool. Well, I'm going to start doing parkour for 20 minutes a day because I love it. It makes me feel good. Like I'm going to turn it into a more sort of like exercise practice. And parkour is just the example. It could be yoga. It could be anything. It could be walking. Doesn't matter. But that's my advice. From a strategy perspective, try to do 5 minutes or less a day. That'll help you actually get traction with it, and then it'll help it actually stick, which is really important. Cool. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I thought that this was super interesting. Stuff I did not know about movement. The myokines are really critical. If you'd like to know more, please download the free PDF ebook that I wrote for y'all called The Owner's Manual Part 2. Click the link below. It's yours. It's free. It'll come right to your email. Enjoy it. So that was, do you want to know how to make your own IV drip of hope? I hope that this was interesting for you. It certainly was interesting for me. And if you find that this is helpful, please share it. Please like it and subscribe and do all the YouTube stuff. But also, if you yourself have found movement to be a game changer for you, please tell us in the comments below, what kinds of movement have you done and what have you noticed? Has it helped your mental health? Has it helped your physical health? That is a very helpful thing to comment about that because it inspires other people, not just from me, but from the whole community who's participating in this, watching this video. We get to learn what has worked for other people. We can ask questions. I'm sure I'll learn something too. So on that note, thank you guys so much for watching the video. I hope you guys have a great day out there, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.